I had like a flame out. Forget about burnout. I went down in flames from not being able to take care of myself. My book, Clinical Dharma, has a lot behind it in that it kind of takes together lessons learned, let's say, over the last really like 30 years, almost 30 years. It really starts with my stopping using drugs and alcohol and getting plugged into this idea that it was a good thing to be of service to people. And I really got into that. And I also got into, I'd never really been into anything particularly spiritual, at least since my bar mitzvah. I enjoyed my bar mitzvah, I liked that, all that, but then I sort of walked away from any of those kind of matters for a long time. So when I got into that service side and into the spirituality side, and then I was brought to a retreat that was at a Zen Buddhist monastery. I had like 4 months sober, and I got my first meditation lesson, and I've never stopped sitting since then. So very quickly, this is the early 90s, and so even secular mindfulness hasn't really developed, and people aren't really talking about it as much outside the Buddhist community. And I got a job as a high school English teacher, and I just started teaching my students to meditate. And so ever since then, in all kinds of different scenarios, I've gone ahead and I've taught it to people. And then, so that's the Dharma part. The Dharma part is that I've been practicing some form of Buddhist meditation for like 28 years. And then the clinical part is, I was an educator for years, starting with that high school English teacher, and then I was a diversity educator, social justice educator. And I noticed, well, I didn't notice, I had like a flame out. Forget about burnout. I went down in flames from not being able to take care of myself, not being able to have a balance in my life with all that. Then when I moved out here to Los Angeles in 2002, I made the transition to becoming a therapist. And, ever since then, I've sort of noticed how easy it is to, in the service of trying to help, to really just take yourself down. And so Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path of the Buddha, the Buddha Dharma, has basically brought me through just about anything and everything that I've been through in my life. So I thought, well, what about just sort of presenting it to people in the helping professions as a self-care program, as it were. And it's also because there's been this, this constant conversation going on about so-called secular mindfulness, where the ethical factors of the Eightfold Path are kind of extracted a little bit. They're not there. It's more like skills training. And so my goal was to put those ethical factors back in and to look at it holistically and say, let's, Buddha presented essentially like a complete psychology that you could work with to end suffering. I mean, that's what he said. He said he taught two things: suffering and the end of suffering. So why not follow that bouncing ball? And then my motivation had a lot to do with just watching my colleagues burn out and watching how people who had the best of intentions and the best skills and even sometimes really pretty decent self-care abilities, just there's one thing missing, it seemed to me. So I'm not saying it's the be all and the end all, but that's my offering. Like, that's been my experience over these years, is that if I turn towards mindfulness meditation that has a basis in ethical living and a basis in the development of wisdom and building my intentions off of that wisdom, that was the way to go. And then I had a few people before me. I think of the psychiatrist Mark Epstein, who's written a few books, and Psychotherapy Without a Self, or Without the Self. A couple other books where he was a Buddhist before he was a psychiatrist. And so I was sort of moved by that too, looking at how I've been taught as an EMDR therapist, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, a therapy developed by Francine Shapiro. And Francine Shapiro talks about we are able to allow the client's brain or the client's psyche or the client's spirit to heal itself. We're not doing anything but facilitating a process. I'm not doing surgery. I'm just like, here's this process, here's this path, and I help them down that path and they heal themselves. So that's the other, that's where it all came together for me, where that's very Buddhist, or that seems very Dharma to me. Is, you know, Buddha said that each of us has to have our own direct experience, that he could only sort of describe what he did, and that we can have that opportunity to have that experience, and that I have to have it directly. So clinical Dharma is a lot about how a clinician or a helper of any kind, because, you know, in the end, you know, on the back jacket of the book, I was like, you know, yoga teachers, this, that, the other, and I ended with podcasters, because we were talking about podcasting before. But you know, that anyone in a helping position, whether they chose it because it's like, I want to be a therapist, or I want to be a doctor, or, you know, so many of us, I mean, you know, it's the reality of life that at some point or another, whether it happens a lot or a little, we're put in that position where someone needs our help. So what does that look like? You know, how do you best provide that? So that was the motivation for the book, and I'm hoping that, you know, I've gotten some decent feedback in terms of people saying, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to try and look at it that way, and maybe I feel like the help will be better, and then the helper will have a sustainable life. They'll be able to keep helping. So that's kind of the ins and the outs of the book.